A month after Mom died, Dad married his mistress, and moved her kids into our house. Now he expects me to give up my room and be their babysitter. Hi, I am here to know if what I have done is right by asking my father to move out of my house. For context, sometime after I turned 12, my parents got a divorce because my father was cheating on my mom with a much younger woman. I will call her Sarah since I don't want to use her real name. I remember the day vividly when I came back home from school early. I had a half day and my mom had given me keys to her house so I could let myself in. We did have a babysitter but she wasn't home yet so I thought she was running late. I heard some noise from my parents' room and I got scared. I ran to get the phone to call 911 when I suddenly heard my dad's voice from upstairs. Curious, I went up to my parents' room to see my dad and this woman, Sarah, throwing their clothes back on. It was honestly scarring and I gasped in shock audibly. They froze seeing my face. I ran out of there immediately and locked myself in my room. I burst into tears as my dad kept pleading with me outside my door to open up so he could apologize. He kept telling me to not tell my mom anything. Before I could say anything or react, I heard my mom yelling downstairs. I opened the door to see my mom standing in the doorway looking at my dad angrily. Apparently, the babysitter had canceled at the last minute so my mom had rushed in from the office after taking a half day so I wouldn't be home alone. She had discovered Sarah trying to get into Dad's car outside and had put two and two together. My dad had driven them to the house thinking that nobody would be home at this time. When my mom noticed that I was home and had tears running down my face, she realized that I must have caught my dad and chewed my dad out. My dad kept apologizing and trying to justify how he didn't mean to hurt us. Despite all the yelling back and forth, my dad said he had to go and drop Sarah back at the office. My mom couldn't believe his words that in the middle of our fight, he was going to walk off and drop his mistress. My mom told him that Sarah could take a cab but my dad insisted saying that he couldn't let her do that. My mom's eyes widened in shock upon hearing his words and my dad left. This affair was very unexpected as my mom and dad had been together for a very long time. His mistress was a woman he worked with who was 20 years younger than him. I don't know what she wanted out of him but I guess it was so important that she had to destroy our family over it. Over the days through several fights, my dad eventually confessed to my mom that Sarah was pregnant. This was devastating for my mom to hear as my mom always had pregnancy-related issues and had miscarried twice after having me. He wanted Sarah to keep the child and had made up his mind about leaving us to start a family with him. This led to a nasty divorce between them. My dad tried to get a hefty alimony from my mom. You see, my mom comes from an affluent family but my dad doesn't. In the divorce, my dad wanted our house and wanted to kick my mom out but because he had cheated, he lost the battle. Throughout all this, my mom tried her best to shield me from what my dad was doing to her but I was old enough to know what was happening. It was a really difficult time for me. Throughout the divorce, my dad never once apologized to my mom or me for what he had put us through. My mom didn't want to separate me from my dad so she allowed him weekend visitation. After the divorce happened my father moved out and started living with Sarah. In the beginning, my dad tried his best to visit me during the weekends. He tried to be sweet and spend time with me doing things that I loved. But as days passed, he started to smell of alcohol and I hated the nauseating smell. I remember once when we went to get ice cream, my dad fell asleep on the bench outside the shop. I was so scared that something had happened to him that I called my mom immediately. When she arrived, she could smell the alcohol in him like I did and realized quickly that he was too drunk to drive and had fallen asleep. She called Sarah from Dad's phone to come and pick him up and brought me back to the house. As you can imagine, my mom was royally pissed off at my dad for putting me through danger. My mom wanted me to have a good relationship with my father regardless of their divide but for him to drink and drive had put not only him but me at risk. Later, when my dad was sober, he didn't even bother apologizing to my mom. He kept saying that he just wanted a nap and that wasn't a crime. My mom warned him to not drink on the days he had to come and see me and my dad agreed. After this incident, I was scared to go anywhere with my dad. Although my dad kept his promise for a while, he slipped back into his old habits very soon. His drinking changed him. I quickly realized that my dad when he was drunk and my dad when was sober were two very different people. I remember one summer weekend, which was my 14th birthday, it was my dad's weekend. My mom asked if she could have me for the weekend as she wanted to take me and my friend to a music event in the city. She knew I loved a particular singer and this singer was going to be performing at the event, hence she wanted to take me there as a birthday present. My dad refused, saying no way, this was his weekend. So off to Dad's place, we went. His mistress didn't even acknowledge my birthday and ignored my presence as usual. I had gotten used to it by now. In the afternoon, my dad suddenly informed me that he was taking me to the music event. I knew he did it to spite our mom, but I was beyond ecstatic as I was going to be watching my favorite singer perform live. My favorite singer was amazing and I was so happy to be there until he was done and it was some other band's turn. I was not interested in any other artist so I went to find my dad. I found him in the drinking area, which was already a bad sign. We had driven to the event and he seemed pretty drunk already with more than a few beers. I asked him nicely if we could go home now. It had been a long day and I was tired. I didn't want to hear any more music but my dad vehemently refused, saying that he paid for tickets so he was going to listen to every band who was going to play in the event. I told my dad that I was really tired and my legs hurt from standing for so long and he got angry and yelled at me that if I did not want to be here anymore, I should go and wait in his car and threw his keys at me. I did not argue, because I knew how scary he was when was drunk and I was afraid of him then. So I went to the car. I was tired, upset and terrified. I was a 14-year-old who was sitting alone in a lonely car in a bad part of the city after midnight because Dad did not want to pay for parking in safer areas near the concert. I wanted to go home and I needed to use the bathroom, but there wasn't any kid-friendly place open anymore at that time. I was afraid of getting kidnapped if I went out alone without my dad. My phone was also dead so I could call my mom for help. I sat there in the dark under the streetlights in Dad's car scribbling on his post-it notes waiting for him to come back. The night was getting chilly but I didn't want to turn on his heat as I was after my dad might scold me later. After 3 hours of sitting alone, scared and tired and holding back the urge to pee, my dad finally came. He was so drunk that he could not walk properly and he had 2 complete strangers with him, who also were very drunk. Dad said we were going to give them a ride home. I asked if it was okay for him to drive and he yelled at me that of course it was okay for him to drive and I was extremely stupid to even ask him that. I sat silently after that as we drove the strangers to their homes. They played loud music throughout the drive. After we dropped them off, we pulled into a gas station. I finally went to the bathroom and then my dad bought me an iced tea and then we talked. He told me that he was very disappointed in me that night. I looked at him surprised while sipping my iced tea. My dad continued to say how he wanted to give me a fun night on my birthday but all I had done was complain to him the whole night. He told me that I had been a bad girl and he was ashamed of how he acted but he had decided to forgive me if I spent the rest of the remaining weekend acting nicely to him and his mistress. He continued to tell me how he didn't want to tell my mom any of this as he didn't want her to punish me for my bad behavior that night. I was very naive back then and loved my dad, hence I genuinely thought that it was all my fault. I apologized and agreed to behave better so we didn't have to tell my mom about any of this even though it was one of the worst nights of my young life back then. Now that I am older I have realized that he gaslighted me and threatened me to be silent because if mom had found out that he put my life at risk by leaving me alone in the car and driving drunk with me, she would have made sure that he would never see me again. As time passed, my dad slowly stopped calling me or replying to me. He continued to pay child support but other than that, he never initiated any contact with me unless it wasn't his birthday. I remember once calling him on his birthday and Sarah picked up his call to tell me that I should stop nagging my father all the time with calls. She told me that my dad was spending time with his son, my stepbrother these days so I shouldn't interfere in their lives anymore. Hearing her say this was heartbreaking to me. I was still a child who was just missing my dad but somehow I was blamed for trying to meddle in his life by his affair partner. After that day, I never called. I did hear from our relatives that Sarah and he went on to have another child but I never stayed in touch with him throughout all this. I am now 17 years old and recently lost my mother around a month ago in what could be the most horrible experience of my life. I spent a month and a half in a hospital taking care of her only to lose her in the end. This is an experience I will never forget and it has scarred me for the rest of my life since I had a very close relationship with my mom. I resented my dad because of the heartache he caused my mother and I blamed him for her death. After mom's funeral, I refused to talk to him initially but my dad kept begging me to allow him back into my life. We were then informed by our mom's lawyer that she had left all her assets to me which meant that our family home now belonged to me. Because I am